Hello and welcome to Resilient Voices. This is the space for honest and deep conversations about how resilience shows up in leadership, personal moments, and everyday life. I am your host, Jessica Schultz, and in each episode, we invite a guest to share a chapter from their journey, the moments that tested them, the turning points that redirected their path, and the practices that kept them moving forward. And my guest today is Rochelle Trow, a global people leader, an author, and advisor who have spent 25 years leading people's strategy across organizations like Unilever, GSK, and Takeda on 3 continents. Her latest Amazon best-selling book, Anchored, is about something I found deeply compelling: how leaders build their inner clarity to make conscious choices under pressure. And today, because this is Resilient Voices after all, we're going to go deep into resilience and what that actually looks like when you're leading on the highest level across culture to complexity and unreal pressure. Pressure that maybe is the conversation we're having today. I'm not sure. So I'm just going to say, welcome, Rochelle. And I am so happy that you're here.
Thank you, Jessica. It's a real honor to be having a conversation with you about resilience of all things, because I think in today's world, we need resilience more than ever. So I'm very
Yeah,
happy to be chatting about this important topic.
great. Great. So where do you want to start? Maybe just take us to a moment in time where you want to build the story from.
Okay, where do I start? I have so many moments that tested my resilience, but I think I'd start with one morning. I got up and I was getting ready for work, and I was dressing and I looked at myself in the mirror and I kind of went, what the hell? And I looked at this person looking back at me in the mirror and I looked at myself and I thought, really? Is this me? I was looking at these chubby cheeks and I was frustrated with myself because it felt like the jacket I was putting on was getting tighter. And I looked at myself and I thought, oh, you're wearing a dark suit again, just dark and tight and feeling uncomfortable. And I'm like, is this really it? I have this amazing career. I'm now living in Switzerland. I have 2 amazing twin boys. I, moved across to Switzerland with my husband from London, where we had lived almost 20 years, not quite. I have everything I want. But the person I was looking at had a dull face. I never smiled. I was looking at myself and constantly disgruntled. And I was looking at myself going, this can't be it. I am a large in size. And when I left South Africa back in 2002, I was a small. So I just looked at myself disgruntled, asking myself, is this it? What the hell, And why is it that? And so, yeah, I guess that was a moment where I really started to ask myself, who am I? And so I would say a large part of me looking inward started with the simple question of, who am I beyond the job title, beyond this massive body that's tight in a suit, beyond this label of being a mother of twins, beyond all these labels we give ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And you say that it seems to be an easy question. Who am I? But that is a compelling and very challenging question for many people to answer, because we do step into our roles, we step into our mask, we step into, well, I mean, it's really, that is not who we really are, is it?
It's not at all. Because at that moment, I was exhausted, disgruntled, feeling unsettled, but just looking at myself going, I can't keep going. And that's the reason why I start this conversation on resilience there. Because at that point I had realized I can't keep doing this. The dark circles under my eyes back then were all about the fact that I was an insomniac. I hardly slept at night. My head never shut up. It was just constantly talking. I left the office at 6 or 5, and some days I work from home, but my mind never stopped. And so I was just exhausted, constantly looking miserable, never smiling, not even appreciating the beauty of the country I lived in. I mean, every day you walk out, you see a mountain, you see a lake. I couldn't even see the beauty. So it really starts to niggle at you. Is this it?
How many years ago is that?
It was not long after I moved to Switzerland. Could have been a few months. Well, actually, I started commuting when I moved to Switzerland in September 2019. I first commuted. The first 10 months was a commute. And then, of course, COVID started and I moved to Switzerland during COVID. So this was, I would say, when I had just moved here with the family, maybe 2, 3 months after the family moved to Switzerland. So it was 2020, I think.
Okay. So yeah, all right. So do you think that when you woke up that morning and looked at this image in the mirror that you couldn't really recognize, had that something to do with the move itself, like change in environment? Because you'd been in London for quite some time, and then just the moving, or was it just that you're starting to just waking up to something? I mean, and just starting to feel that life had been happening to you for a long time and wasn't really lived through you, or was, what do you think? What was the?
Well, at that point, looking in the mirror was kind of the shock of you visibly changed. You visibly changed from this bubbly, smiley person. Yes, you went into the office every day and you smiled. But when I think back to the smile back then and I think about the smile I have today, the smile is considerably different. Back then, I was just smiling. It was almost like it was an autopilot movement because
Yes, it
my
wasn't
body
really
was going,
smiling.
it wasn't a smile. My body was fighting. It was saying, "You exhausted. You need more sleep." I constantly felt like I was in this deficit.
Yeah, yeah,
And I think it was the realization that I can't continue this way. Something has got to change because I can't continue. Because at this point, I think my insomnia had been on and off for almost 10 years. And I used to pride myself going, "Oh, it's great. I don't need much sleep." Quite frankly, you do need sleep. Now I need 8 hours of sleep. And yes, I do
yeah,
have broken sleep, but I have 8 hours of sleep and I
yeah.
sleep
That's a
dead. My brain doesn't
non-negotiable,
talk.
right? Yeah,
My
yeah,
brain doesn't talk anymore in the night when I sleep at all. It just goes dead. I sleep like I'm dead. Sometimes, yes, I surface out of a dream. I have maybe a dream,
yeah,
but
yeah.
it's not like my brain was in the past. In the past, it was almost as if my brain was working. And so it was that pushed me to say, you cannot continue, which meant I had to deconstruct my life and I needed to unpick a few things.
So what changed then? What did you how did you,
How did I
where did you
deconstruct?
start? Like,
Well, like any brilliant mind, I mean, I'm not saying I'm a completely brilliant mind, but like with anybody who lives from the shoulders up and lives purely in your head, you start with knowledge. So I started reading a lot of books, trying to understand, answer this question, who am I? I read The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer and I was scratching my head. I couldn't understand this book. It was just too much for me. Put it
yeah.
down, read another book, read lots of books. So I started with trying to unpack how I was feeling in my head. At the same
Yeah, I
time,
mean
I did
that's the
have a
place to
coach.
go, isn't it? When you lived your life in your head always, and obviously that's the first place to go.
Yeah. So I
Yeah,
started in my head. I did have the privilege of having a coach at the time. So I would explore some of this with my coach. And then I started with my head, but I never quite got the answer. So I could rationalize what I was experiencing, but I couldn't shift it because the more I tried to shift, I mean, you try and tell yourself you're going to go on diet. Couldn't go on diet because it was my body that was keeping all the weight. It didn't matter what I did. I couldn't lose weight. I did try diets, it didn't work. Try telling yourself you need to sleep. Of course, you can't sleep. So I started to realize that I needed to deal with stuff beneath the surface as opposed to the surface. But I also had to make some dramatic changes in my life. And so I set out by saying to myself, well, at least this is how I framed it. I've got 4 things to do. 1, I've got to deal with my marriage. 2, I've got to rebuild my relationship with my kids because I'm this mother who's constantly absent. I don't really have I mean, I love them, of course, but am I showing them what they need to learn? And then I had to answer the question of who am I? And then, of course, I had to deal with my physical self. So I had 4 goals, very loose goals. I think the best thing I did was say to myself, you cannot achieve all of this. So where do you want to start? So I started with dealing with my marriage, which, long story short, I asked for a separation, well, for a divorce, but he didn't want to divorce me, so I had to go on a separation. I then started to answer the question of who am I? And soon realized that my life was linked too much to my identity and an identity that I didn't recognize. I identified myself more with my job title and my role titles as opposed to me as a person. And so through that process, I had to unravel my identity, which took a lot of work, a lot of coaching, a lot of reading, a lot of
Yeah.
reflection.
Yeah.
But 90% of that journey required me asking myself really tough questions. And it was only in accepting that a lot of my self-beliefs, my identity was wrapped up in a narrative that I didn't necessarily construct. It was this narrative of the world and the way the world needs to operate and the way corporates value people and all these external factors. And so the deconstruction that I had to go on to reframe my own, well, definition of resilience, because just bringing it back to resilience.
Yeah. Yeah.
In the corporate world, we expected to just keep going. We expected to deliver results based on commercial targets.
Yeah.
But let's
And if you don't sleep at night, if you like think all the time, that's not a problem because that's not really because when you actually get into your corporate role, that doesn't matter as long as you deliver because you are not you are your role, not the human being, Rochelle, right?
That's exactly the point, Jessica, because, part of it is at work, you come in, you're expected to deliver. You're not expected to leave yourself at the door. But we don't spend any time talking about the fact that you're a human being and what does a human being need? Because let's be clear, to deliver our commercial targets and profit, which of course it's right, I'm not saying it's wrong. We need to drive performance. We need to drive efficiency, change, transformation. But we don't ask the question, what happens to the individual in that change? And the conversation I had to have with myself is, what happens to me in the context of that? Because as a human being, let's break it down. If you look
Yeah.
at the neuroscience lens, the
Yeah.
psychology lens,
Mm.
human beings are not built for efficiency, speed, productivity in the way that an organization or AI or technology is. So my needs were considerably different to the environment and the identity that I had constructed for myself, which
Yeah.
meant I had to ask myself, why do I believe that? Which meant going back to such old self beliefs I had to unravel.
Yeah.
And to
Yeah.
look at yourself and say to yourself, well, actually, the fact that I think performance is more important than an individual, because let's also be honest, when I was in a corporate role in a senior leadership position, I focused on performance. I didn't focus on the human. Of course, I was empathetic, I understood,
Mm.
but did I really work on supporting human beings in corporate? I focused on delivering the results.
Yeah, but that's also because I think that even if you as an individual senior leader have wanted to focus on the individual, that was the structures within the organizations. They're not built to promote that type of perspective, right?
Well, yes,
Or
I'll give you one example as an HR person, and I'm sure I annoy a lot of HR people when I say this. Just the way we've constructed the performance management and the bonus systems in an
mm,
organization is a
I know.
direct contradiction. It reinforces competitive driving for results as opposed to how do I drive for results, but with healthy people. So there's no space in that performance management system. So because it promotes such unhealthy behavior. And so, quite frankly, that's just one process. There's loads of processes in the organization that we really need to reconsider given the way the world is moving.
Yeah,
We're moving at
totally. I couldn't
such a
agree.
rapid pace.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. This is, I mean, we've really created something that is not working well with how human beings are, what our true needs are.
Exactly. So, so to go back, I had to rewire this definition of and accept. There's a lot of acceptance involved in this. My body is not built for this. And in doing, challenging those self beliefs and reframing what rest means to me, what a role means to me. How am I going to live in this environment and be able to achieve my goals but not compromise on my own? I had to redefine all of that.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
of course, and as this was going along in my journey, I did a course with my kids, another one of my goals, redefining, and I did a course on, it's called Connections in Mind, but it's all about helping my children understand that as a mother, I am their prefrontal cortex, for want of a better words, their executive functioning skills, which is why parents have got to repeat themselves so many times because that part of the brain develops last.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so by doing this course with them, I was able to help them understand that sometimes, even when I respond as their mother, I respond from my emotional brain, which we
yes,
labeled
yeah,
our bottom brain for fun and we labeled our front brain. And so when my boys were having an emotional reaction, we'd go, okay, hang on, pause. Which brain are you operating from? And then they go, oh, bottom brain. Okay, okay. So we need some time out before we deal with this. Yes.
yes,
And making it normal that as their mother, I did exactly the same. Sometimes my responses were driven from my emotional brain where there's zero logic because I
yeah,
was driven
yeah.
by all these old self beliefs. And so just normalizing how our brain works, how I respond as a mother, which is not always appropriate, what's my relationship with work, all these things together helped me
That
get
is,
rid of
I
my
just want
anxiety.
to really. That's amazing to do that with your children. I mean, beautiful. So thank you for sharing that, Rochelle. I think that is very responsible parent parenting.
Yeah, sadly, you've got to be, I would say, more vulnerable at home than even when you are in a leadership role. Because the vulnerability I had to show as a mother was far bigger than any vulnerability I had to show in my corporate job. Because showing your children that, you know what, I don't have it all together. I'm going to go crazy and developing a language. But, I think it builds rather than detracts. And so then the final point I would make to go on to how did I shift completely is I
Mm,
then decided to become a nutritarian. Now, many people go, what's a nutritarian? Now, a nutritarian is simply a plant based eating which focuses on putting micronutrient dense food into your body, feed your body what it needs by having the right proportions and the right food. Actually, there's no quantity constraints. It's about having the right food in your body. And so moving to becoming a nutritarian, which means no processed food. I lost 30 kilograms over 7 months by simply changing the way I eat. But the biggest difference is that at this point of all the changes I've just described, because this wasn't a 1 year journey, it was a 3 to 4 year journey.
yeah, yeah,
This
yeah.
was 3 years before I could deal with my body. I wasn't carrying the stress in the way that I used to carry stress. I had been clearer about the role my job plays in my life. I was clearer about who I was as a parent. I wasn't quite 100% done with who am I, because I had still had this question in the back of my mind, but I was a lot clearer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the insomnia had disappeared. My body was then able to just, it's almost like the excess weight melted off me. Yes, it was a combination of eating better, but since becoming a nutritarian, I've not had to take any drugs, any headache tablets. When I have felt sick, I felt sick when I've eaten in a restaurant where I had to compromise and eat some salt, which I don't normally eat, where I had to have some oil in my food, which I don't normally have because I have plant-based fats. Then I have felt a bit sick, but more nauseous, not feeling quite right, as opposed to all these normal illnesses. Like I used to have terrible headaches in the past. None of that, all gone. But it didn't happen in one day. And so ultimately that defined I can live a crazy, hectic life. Because I went back into a corporate role after being out for 11 months with a little bit of burnout. I did go, bless you, I did go back to corporate. I had a busy job. I did everything I needed to do,
Yeah.
but I did it differently. I didn't do it at the expense of my health.
Oh, that just really reminds me a bit about my own journey. But I did go into a full like a stress collapse and burnout. And it sounds like you caught yourself before that, and that maybe your body was reacting a bit differently by putting on. Because I think that the nervous system, when it's so stressed, when you're constantly in fight and flight, it sort of protects itself. So maybe I'm thinking that for you, maybe the excess weight was also a way of protecting your body, protect you for all the perceived threats that your nervous system thought that you were like exposed to. Does that make sense to you, or do you think that
I think to some extent it probably did protect me, although the point at which I started to question everything, my body started to react louder than my mind. A simple example is taking my children to school one day. All three of us stepped on the same piece of ground where there happened to be ice on it. All three of us, just outside our doorstep. All three of us stepped on the same piece of wet floor. I slipped, broke my wrist. Less than 3 hours later, I was in the hospital having surgery, putting plates in my hand. Why is that significant? Because I think my body was saying enough. That forced me to stop. I couldn't drive. I couldn't even do anything because it was my hand, it was my wrist.
yeah, yeah,
It forced me to stop. And I think at that, I think I was off work for 2 weeks, but I couldn't drive for 6. Couldn't do a lot for 6 because my hand. It forced me to think a lot. And I would say in that time when I was off work, but also limited in what I could do, I had more capacity to think about stuff that wasn't work. Because typing even became a problem because it was quite low in the wrist. I've got this
yeah.
long scar
Okay,
here. But
yeah,
so I think there were moments, if I look back, where my body started to protest. It protected me, but it started to protest.
yeah. And I can completely relate that because that was similar to what happened to me because my body and I didn't listen to all the signals that I had been in my body for a long time. And just one morning, my legs did not carry me out of bed. So that's how my body just told me, it's like, this is enough. We've had enough now. Now you're stopping now and you have to do something different. So I think it is, yes, our bodies will work with us for a very long time, even though, because I think that, I mean, if you put on weight or if you have like pains or like, I mean, I think your body is giving you all these signals for a long time before then the body says, okay, if your mind is not, your conscious mind is not listening, analytical mind is listening, then we're going to stop because we've had enough now. So yeah, I think that
That's
is, yeah.
absolutely true. And it's so funny now that I've really shifted. The first thing that reacts is my body before my
Yeah.
mind. So now I
Yeah.
have the reverse.
Yeah.
If something's happening in the environment, my body reacts. Sometimes I don't quite know what it's reacting to. I get the sensation or I get this feeling and I
Mhm.
kind of go, it just causes me to pause. And when I have this uneasy feeling, I say to myself, okay, I don't know what this is telling me, but there's something in this. And I go to bed, sleep it out, and the next morning I wake up and I know what it is. Or sometimes I have to meditate and reflect on the sensation and see what is coming up for me. But now my body tells me first before my mind. Actually, my mind has to catch up with my body
Yeah. Yeah.
because my body's speaking louder than my brain.
And that is a great place to be, isn't it? Because the body knows. I mean, the body keeps score. It's so wise because we don't really
Absolutely.
need to know what's wrong, really. But we know our body will tell us that there is something here. And if you're aware, if you're sensitive enough to those signals, obviously you can use that to your benefit.
Absolutely. I mean, it just reminds me of I mean, I read The Body Keeps Score. I think that one's by Bessel van der Kolk, and I read all of Gabo Mate's books.
Yeah. Yeah.
And The Myth of the Normal was my favorite. Very
Mm,
big book, but was one of my favorites. So I've read just about every book on these
yeah.
topics that we're talking about. So a
Yeah.
lot of what I say is not just what happened to me; it's some of the stuff I learned through books, through science. So it's all of this is backed up
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
deep research.
Yeah. And it's quite it's it really integrates when you also what you read. It's like, yes, I can relate to that. I can feel that. Ah, wow, this is what's going on with me. So it just gives that a different understanding as well. It's not just theoretical knowledge, but it is lived knowledge, and that is obviously wisdom. Because
Absolutely.
because that's one thing I was thinking about this with when we talk about resilience. Because I don't know your definition of resilience. What you say? What is resilience for you, to you? What does that mean?
I would say it's changed. If I go back to my days in corporate, in the person I spoke about that was constantly focusing on performance and delivery and results, for me, resilience was, can I cope with all of these 10 multiple priorities and can I deliver the results? And of course, back then we would judge people on, we would praise people for delivering 3 projects, all at once concurrently. But actually, when you really look at it, sometimes our expectations of people are ridiculous. Sometimes as another example, I read job descriptions and I kind of go, you expecting this one job to do these things? I mean, it's almost I mean, this is the craziness with all this change in the world when we've got to cut organizational budgets and we do restructures. All we do is package the work differently. But what I've noticed happening is we build these job descriptions up so that we're physically asking the impossible. And you know what? As an HR person, I'm ashamed to say this. I've done this. We've kind of go, oh, we don't need that job. We don't need that job. We can just add this bit to that bit and move that bit to that bit. It's like, no,
Yeah,
no, I've done it. So I know. So my definition of resilience there is, can this person cope and can they show up as a decent leader? Not ruffle feathers, deliver, speak eloquently, speak the corporate talk. Crazy version of resilience. And as you said earlier in the conversation, we never spoke about, it's not that we didn't care as people. So I'm not saying I'm a bad HR person. We just never spoke about the impact on people. We never asked people, can you cope with this? How's it going in a way? So of course we'd ask, how are you? But really, did we really want to know when we'd ask, how are you? It's like Tell me how
because you're
you are.
walking
Let's
past
move
someone in
on.
the corridor, like how are you? And then you're on the way in the meeting. It's like, no, but yeah, you don't have
So
time for the answer.
exactly. So for me, resilience back then meant something very different. Now, resilience for me means, can this person show up and be human with all of this noise and all of this stuff going around them? The first test for me is, can this person's mind switch off when they need it to switch off? Are they getting enough sleep? Because their body needs sleep to grow. You know, is this person working at such a pace and maybe planning, trying to recover during their 10 days of vacation? That for me is a warning signal. Resilience means this person has had to have built in lots of little mechanisms that keeps them grounded, calm, rested, and has healthy patterns to, I would say, restore themselves on a daily basis. Resilience is constant restoration as it happens. It's not, I wait for my vacation. It's not, I wait for the weekend.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is where it becomes counterintuitive, because a lot of people, if I say this is resilience, they kind of go, but how's that efficient? What people don't realize is that when you form new neural pathways or ways of being, the pause, as an example, can be a 30-second pause. We're not talking about pause for 5 hours, not 2 minutes. We're saying, if you are mindful and more conscious of how you're showing up in the world, you will be more resilient in coping with what comes up. Because we know, if we study the psychology of the unconscious mind,
Yeah.
it's only 5% of our brain that is conscious. 95% of our brain is unconscious and in the subconscious. And what's in the unconscious mind and the subconscious mind are all the things I spoke about earlier.
Yeah.
Self-beliefs, patterns,
Yeah.
what I learned, how I learned to cope, how I learned to be resilient, all those narratives that shape how we act on autopilot is where it is. So when we respond in today's world, in my old definition of resilience, we're operating, like you said, from autopilot. Just your body's protecting yourself constantly. Your nervous system is just operating in deficit. In my definition, in my new definition, is my body's operating from a place of complete calm. I understand myself. I understand my triggers. I understand what is happening. The minute information comes into me, I know where it fits and I can make better conscious choices. Does the stuff in the world ever go away? No. But how I choose to show up is what makes me resilient. A very
That's it.
complex answer.
No, but I think that no, for me, it totally makes sense because I share that belief and way of doing things as you do, and also done a lot of research in this area, so and also experienced it myself. So I think because it's in this space, I think this is the way of being really. I think it is because for myself, I had to redefine what is it to be productive, what is it to be efficient, how do I deliver results in a way that is going to add value to the people I work with, to my clients. And I think that comes from the space, it comes from the pause, it comes from the ability to make conscious choices. And those conscious choices only comes when you can create that room for awareness for, wow, now is this my own, like you say, is this from the 95% or is this from like a conscious active choice that I'm making based on my current knowledge, wisdom, but not from the automatic system that will most of the times drive me into maybe not a bad decision, but into old patterns. That's not how we're going to I think change anything or create results that are in line with what's really needed in this new fast-paced environment that we're operating in.
Yeah.
So yeah, but no, I completely share that image.
Yeah. I think what frightens me most is, I mean, we share a background. I mean, I had got to senior levels in my role. I've been on the best leadership development programs. Had the best training. I've got bachelor's degrees, master's degrees. I'm a coach. But the scary part is how little I truly understood about my body and how human beings are made up. And yet I was in the senior role leading, we're talking big businesses. I was, in Takeda, I was the head of HR for Europe and Canada of a massive organization. But I didn't even know myself. And so, yes, it's no surprise that I needed to figure out who I am. Now, it doesn't mean I was a bad HR person. I operated from a place of what I understood from the theory, the conceptual knowledge. I made the right choices, but the absence of truly understanding and appreciating how your body works in relation to this, how many people know that? It's not a lot. Actually, the people who do know that are most of the people who've left corporate and I'm never going back. I'm saying you can be in corporate and be resilient in my new definition. And that's the whole reason why I wrote the book, because the book is an attempt to help people understand themselves and how to operate in the crazy world we live in today, because we can't change that.
No, and I think that's beautiful. And I think that anchored is a really good, I mean, just the title itself gives away so much. I mean, how can you build that inner clarity to make the conscious choices under pressure? Because we live under pressure. Businesses, obviously, that's the part of the purpose of a business is to be profitable somehow and deliver value for its shareholder, for the people. I mean, so it needs to be profitable. Otherwise, you don't have a business. But it's just how do you become profitable? How do you lead? And how can you make that in a way that it's human centered? It's based on like what human beings need because we work with human beings, don't we? I mean, you can't really remove that equation. But I think that a lot of senior leaders, they forget that, I mean, it's the people in the organization that brings the value.
Wouldn't say they forget, Jessica.
Okay, okay. Yeah, please
I
help
would
me.
say they are ill informed. Let's just
Okay.
say, when I sat on these top teams, and no disrespect, I sat with brilliant leaders, really good backgrounds. And when I also look at the people I coach today, but I also think about some of the leaders I've worked with, they were like me. They don't understand the connection between living from the head up. I would say a lot of the leaders I worked with live from the head up. They just haven't truly understood. Now, is it their fault? No. But I think in today's world, what will differentiate leaders is because we're at a tipping point in the leaders who can deliver results, but with human beings, because let's also be clear, AI will not succeed without human beings. Okay, it can succeed, but it'll be very negative, use of AI. The leaders who will succeed are the leaders who understand how human beings can play a better role if they understood themselves better. They would be more productive. I've proven to myself. When I went back to corporate, the mental capacity that I used to deliver the role that I did when I was at Onsemi, it was almost as if I was doing half a job, had a full-time job, but what it required of me, I only had to use half of the day physically because it was my mental capacity had trebled. Since I've been out of corporate again for the second time for the past 18 months, I've written 2 books and a journal. So I've published 3 books. I've done projects, I coach people. I do more mentally than I've ever done in my past. So the
That is,
leaders who are going to win are those who understand how to leverage both.
yeah, absolutely. And what you're really saying is that it's possible to lead in a different way, be more productive, and be more of the human being, and deliver more of yourself in other areas in your life. That is not your career. That gives you and brings you other values that could, like as a mother, as a just human being, and have time and energy left for yourself, right?
Absolutely. But that requires you to demystify this very big word called fear. Because firstly, you ask any leader, are you afraid of something? They will never be true. Of course, I'm not afraid. What they don't realize is that the decisions they are taken are coming from a place of fear. Why? Because when the nervous system takes over, your response operates from a place of safety. So for you to be safe, what do? What happens to the quality of your decisions? What happens to the quality of your judgment? So if we reframe the way we look at fear when we're making decisions to drive corporate profit, now I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm saying if we think about those decisions a little more consciously and clearer, we'll understand that sometimes the decisions we make are knee-jerk responses. I mean, we read the newspaper, watch the news. How many organizations are cutting thousands of jobs because of AI? Now, I'm not saying they're wrong, but how they're doing it is fundamentally wrong. Why? Because they are creating an industry where people are afraid of AI because all they see in the headlines of 2,000 jobs, 3,000 jobs because of AI. Now, of course, those are the reporters that are probably reporting it in a way that's meaningful for their newspapers. That's besides the point.
Yeah,
If we
yeah,
show the world that we should be afraid of AI, how do we respond? And so, actually, how many organizations are making decisions about AI from a place of helping their organization not be afraid of AI? So, they talk about job cuts. How many talk about how do we build capability in our organization to retool our organization to work with AI rather than just cut? Of course, we have to cut, but we also have to show commitment to developing new capabilities in organizations.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that I was listening to this conversation about how which when you talk about performance review and performance management, and how that is also changing out, because I think in more roles you're collaborating with AI. So it's also how you as a professional in your role use the AI as a part of your delivering value to an organization. But it's also obviously then how do you use AI in a way that still is in line with the company values, that everything. So you actually have a different dimension to the role. So you still need to be very good at what you're doing, because somehow you need to decode the AI data that you get. Is this valid? Is this true? Is this? I think it's, if we're starting to talk about it in a different way, obviously that's going to create a different skill set, and maybe remove the more mundane tasks so it can be more, create maybe that space to be more, use more of our capability to deliver different value in a different way. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. Which is why, I brought it down to the simple word of fears, because how to deliver capability in a different way requires us to look at what we might be afraid of as
yeah,
information. But we need to ask ourselves, is this really a fire? I talk about fear as a smoke alarm. If we treat fear as a smoke alarm, it's a question of, it's not saying a smoke alarm is not there to say run. The
no, no,
smoke alarm is an early signal. So it's
yeah,
asking you to ask the question,
yeah,
what information do I have? Is this a real fire or is it just burnt toast? If it's burnt toast, what am I responding to? Not just act. But at the moment, we see a lot of people responding to perceived fires. Those perceived fires are the quality of the decisions, what's driving the decision. So all those things play a role in leadership. And so I've noticed, at least in a lot of the conversations I have with other people like yourself, but also in what I read, it's the quality of decision making that's going down because the pressure's risen and the body is taking over. The nervous systems of leaders
Yeah.
are taking over far
Yeah.
more than ever before. In the past, leaders had time to respond. So if we just look at the entire conversation we've had and everything you and I have both gone through, imagine that with every person in your organization. If they have not been through similar aha moments, they are working almost like in a pressure cooker, where it's
Mhm,
at
mhm.
some point it's going to burst. So we've got to build more resilience in organizations by helping people understand how their body works in relation to it all. That will
Yeah.
enable better resilience. Not hiding from the conversation, openly having the discussion. Your body's not built for this. This is what the organization needs for you. How can the two meet each other? It's not saying organization don't go after profit. It's saying, yes, you can go after profit, but let's do it responsibly. But it's also saying to the individual, listen, you each have an accountability in this. So the individual has a greater accountability because the individual's got to take ownership of learning about their body, their minds, their
Yeah.
nervous systems, and
Yeah.
choose to respond better. So I see in the new world, there's a greater accountability for both organizations and people. And people cannot point to businesses and say, my manager's, too demanding, expects too much. If you know what your body's capable of, you can ask better questions of your manager. But if you don't know, you're simply going to be the victim and keep pointing fingers. So I see there's a higher level of accountability required on both
Yeah.
sides.
Yeah. And that makes so much sense. I see that as well then. But so for me, I'm just thinking about, because if we work with the leaders, helping the leaders to understand how they can work with inner peace, inner clarity to make more conscious choices and connect that to, okay, so how is my body work? I mean, what's my responsibility in this, and how can I work with my body as using my body, my full being as a tool to achieve that. And then obviously in the extension, how can I support my team, my people to do the same? How do we need to build like the management teams, the organizational structures? How do we do that shift? And I think that is the key here, isn't it, Rochelle? That we need to help organizations and leaders to actually change, to step into your shoes, to get your understanding on. And then my question is then, how do we do that? How do we make that change?
Well, I mean, it starts with the basics, honest conversations, like listening to podcasts like this. But equally, as I talk to leaders, just on Monday next week, I go into an organization. I won't mention the name because I don't know how confidential they want it to
Yeah,
be,
yeah,
but I'm
yeah,
I'm spending a few hours with the leadership team talking about a leadership transition and what happens to them under this leadership transition.
yeah,
Because ultimately, especially when the agenda is shifting and the agenda might be more focused on operational efficiencies. So what happens to you as a leadership team? So firstly, do you understand yourself? And so I've constructed, instead of going in and talking about my book, I've constructed a conversation to help them understand, well, what happens to people under change? When they're under pressure and under stress and a change, automatically what happens to your mind? When you don't have information, you start making it up. Who starts making it up? Your nervous system. And you make up that conversation based on an old self-belief. And ultimately, if that conversation is made up, and if you understand that there's and you learn to separate what are the facts in this transition from what are the unknowns in this
yeah,
transition to what are the
yeah,
assumptions. If you just separate data with those three columns, you start to look at it differently. So I've constructed a whole conversation and then I end up with, okay, well, now that we've come up with this list of what we know, what we don't know, and what we're assuming, how then will we label this? Is it burnt toast or is it a fire? And if so, why? So I've literally designed a session that's a 2-hour conversation around helping them through the narrative of what happens in the mind and ultimately what happens with the information. And therefore, what's your choice in this? So I look forward to next week. So that's just one example of how I work
Yeah.
with organizations and what we should be doing. Because if I said to a leader, oh, by the way, you need to go and rewire yourself, they'd probably look at me, what? We don't have time for this. How's that going to help me deliver results? So
Yeah.
if anything, Jessica, I'm experiencing so much resistance to people wanting to change because they don't understand it. So what the mind cannot understand, they don't want to believe. But
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
brave souls that I do coach who are willing to do the uncomfortable stuff, I'm seeing brilliant results. I would say, if anything, I'm worried that the amount of pressure in organizations today are limiting people like you and me from helping organizations shift.
Yeah.
Because there's no capacity for these leaders to even want to have a conversation with us. They only come to us when something breaks. And that's wrong. You know, for you and me, we want to build resilience and prevent it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, definitely. And I feel like about what you're saying. I see that pressure cooker. It's about to, if we can stop it from exploding, if we do exactly what you're doing, having the conversation start to create the awareness, create that space, the pause to actually to really start to understand that there's something that needs to change in the how, and how can we do that both on an individual level but also in the organization. And obviously an organization is not an organism without individuals in it, because it doesn't live on its own, but it becomes another organism based on the behaviors of the people in the organization. So if it can start to change, it will obviously ripple out and hopefully get that change in corporate culture and the way we do things.
Absolutely. I agree. I think it's hugely rewarding work to see organizations shift, but we're on a journey. I just see a lot more resistance to it, but
Yeah. But I think
we
that
understand why.
resistance, yeah, because it is resistance to change. It's a natural thing. Well, but it's just a matter of I think just start to get those little change and shifters, and eventually it will change, and we will get there. I think, because I'm an optimist about the future. I think that there's enough wisdom out there, and enough people that knows that something needs to change, and I do believe that it will.
Absolutely. I'm an optimist. I'm
Yeah,
just stating the observation that,
yeah,
to
yeah,
do this and to keep our future brighter, we just need to share the wisdom that many of us have collected through our journeys. And so it's,
yeah, yeah,
it's the reason why I'm doing the work I'm doing. And, so writing the book was not about making me famous. Writing the book was about spreading the joy, spreading the understanding
yeah, yeah,
of what we need. A book is the cheapest form of resource. It's about you picking it up and saying, I want to read it. And actually, if somebody writes to me and says, can you give me your book? I'm like, yeah, sure. Here's a digital copy. Have it. I'd love you to read it. Everybody has access to a device. So if you want a digital copy, just write to me on LinkedIn and I send it freely. Of course, you got to, if you want it printed, you have to pay to print it. That's
yeah,
okay.
yeah,
But the bottom line is, I've written the book because I want to empower the world, empower one person at a time. I'm not famous like Mel Robbins and those sort of people, but each of us, even in our small parts in the world, we can make a difference. So I am also very optimistic about the future.
yeah. That's amazing. I like that, because we really need to see more of that, because there is so much in on the big global arena. I think there's so much fear being spread, there's some positive things are going to come out. Things are going to become better, and you can be part of that change. So I think that is just be part of the change that you want to see in the world. That's part of one of the things I try to live after. That's one of the reasons why I do this podcast and having these conversations, because I think that obviously there is at least one person that need to hear what you have to say. I'm sure there are more than one, but if we can reach one person with that message, and then a ripple effect and how that can bring some change out there. So I think this is just that the same way of just wanting to spread the wisdom and wanting to share that lived experience from people's lives. So I really appreciate your time, Rochelle, and this conversation has been just beautiful and so inspiring, and I feel so much hope. So with that said, do you have any final message that you want to send out there?
Yeah. Well, firstly, thank you for the conversation. I get so much joy from having these conversations because I know, just as you say, by having this conversation, if it
Yeah.
shifted one person, it's done its
Yeah.
job, but I'm sure it will be more. And, it's from these conversations, so many people reach out and contact me. So I just feel such great joy that people even take the time to listen to this stuff. The message I would leave people with is everything I've said probably sounds like a lot, but it's a lot simpler than you actually know. And why do I say that? Because everything you need, you already have it. It's inside of you. It's about unlocking the knowledge you already have. It's not anything new. It's about just making the unconscious conscious. It's as simple as that. And it's easier than you think, but sounds like a lot. And a lot of people stop because they think, oh, I don't have the time for this. It's about building micro habits daily. And with time, it all shifts. Because I didn't shift in one day, it took years, but it was
Yeah.
through micro changes.
Yeah.
So that's the message I'd leave your listeners with. So
Thank you so much, Rochelle, for sharing your wisdom and your experience. And thank you for all your everyone that's been listening. And obviously, if you gained any insights, which I'm sure you did, just connect with the podcast with me, with Rochelle, and join us for the next time for a new conversation about resilience in leadership and life. And just until then, stay safe and grow your resilience. Thank you. Bye.